Welcome to the Panic Room, where we talk about all things panic-inducing. I am the Queen of Panic. Warning, some episodes may contain content that may be disturbing to others. Viewer discretion is advised. Now let the games begin. I attended what was expected to be a super fun party, ringing in 2015 at a close friend's home. I expected to be awake until dawn, so I made sure to eat a big dinner and arrived late to the party around 11 p.m. with two of my best friends. We're a pretty tight-knit group of social people, and despite the party being a combination house show with several bands playing, I knew virtually all of the 60 or so people who were already there when I arrived. Among friends and acquaintances, everyone was celebrating, drinking, and having a great time. I had planned to meet up with some friends around 2 a.m. when they were done bartending a public event, so I was drinking socially, but in moderation. I'm no stranger to the sauce and have a healthy tolerance. By midnight, the party had grown to at least 100 people, and by this time, there were people drifting in from neighboring parties and surrounding university area, despite attempts to limit attendees to people we all actually knew. I opened a third beer at 1 a.m. and continued taking photos, snaps, and messaging other friends who were not there. Around 1:30 a.m., I started to feel really drunk, and thinking that perhaps I was just overwhelmed by the constant activity all around me, I stepped into the mostly empty living room for a breather, and to message my friend. I sent her a message inviting her to the party, as we'd planned on meeting up. As I finished my message, I felt someone come up behind me. He pressed his body against me as he grabbed my hip. As I straightened up, I could feel him bending down slightly to whisper in my ear. But it wasn't a whisper. He clearly said to me, "In a few minutes, you aren't going to remember anything. And then, I'm gonna rape the shit out of you." I froze. It hit me. I wasn't really feeling drunk. The confusion I had attributed to social anxiety, or the large crowd, I was experienced because I had been drugged. I knew I only had moments to prevent the inevitable. I ran from him best I could, and did not turn around. I went and retrieved my purse and jacket, and started calling the two people I meant to meet up at 2 a.m. I was so out of it. I was having a hard time communicating what was happening. I started crying, moving throughout the house, trying to find someone I could explain it to. I was too disoriented. Thankfully, friend number 1 was able to leave from bartending early and came to get me. He called me, and as I ran outside, the creepy guy literally chased me. I got to my friend's car, and as I started to black out, he said the creepy guy was trying to wave him down, shouting to him that he, creepy guy, was my friend and was going to take me home. Friend 1 told me I just kept saying, "Drive, drive," as he took me home, where we met up with friend number 2, who was bartending the event. At 2:30, I lost consciousness and remained unconscious for 5.5 hours. They were shaking me, trying to get some kind of reaction. Nothing. I didn't respond in any way. They sat up with me throughout the night to make sure I was okay. Around 7 a.m., I somehow managed to get up and climb into my bed. At 9 a.m., I awoke with a start and had no idea where I was. I was so relieved to discover that I was safely at home. I was high a total of 20 hours and didn't feel normal again for several days. I don't think I'll ever know who drugged me, and I have only a vague description to work from. This is not the scariest story, but it definitely creeped me the fuck out. For background, I'm 20-year-old and female. I matched with this guy on Tinder a while back. His name was Nick, and he seemed pretty cool, so I gave him my Snapchat. We talked a little, but it died out quickly. I didn't tell him the exact town I lived in, but the city around 10 minutes away because it's decent sized and has a big population of people, and I figured he wouldn't be able to find me just by knowing that bit of information. A few weeks ago, he started messaging me and we made small talk. Everything seemed normal for a while, up until New Year's Eve. The day before, he messaged me saying he was going to be in the area, the city I told him I was from, and asked if I wanted to meet for lunch. I told him possibly and that I would let him know. The next night, I had a New Year's Eve party with a small group of my friends. I spent most of the day getting ready and was not looking at my phone. At 7:30, I finally looked at Snapchat and saw that Nick had not only messaged, but also he called me. "Hey, I'm in," insert name of city here. I responded telling him I was sorry, and I just saw his message. He opened it within minutes and totally freaked out. He said something along the lines of, "Just so you know, I'm not really interested in someone who can't even answer the phone when I drive 6 hours just to see her." He said that we had plans, and why else would he have driven up here? I was confused, because we never had plans. He told me that he was going to be in the area, which made me think he was here for work or to visit a friend. It is not uncommon for people to travel here for work. I explained this to him and told him that we did not have plans, and that I didn't ask him to drive all the way out here for me. He told me he sat around for 2 hours waiting for me and bought me flowers. Again, I was confused, because we never planned a time or place to meet and had never confirmed plans. You don't make plans by just telling someone that you're going to be in the area. I apologized and told him again that we never had plans. He told me to make it up to him I had to drive up and see him tomorrow. Yeah, fuck that. I remembered that I had my location shared on Snapchat, so he could have easily shown up at my house. I turned off my location, but kept him on Snapchat in case he tries to show up at my house. Luckily, I have not heard from him since. My dad is a retired police officer and has a gun, and I'm not afraid to use it. So Tinder creep who drove 6 hours for me? Let's not meet. This is my sister's story, which she is happy for me to share, and it took place 3 years ago on New Year's Eve. My sister is a student in South London and has lived in some pretty awful student accommodation during her time studying. This particular house she lived in had trouble with the front door lock and was just off a very busy main road. She had 4 other housemates, and her room was in the attic, which obviously is set up for all creepy happenings. But in reality, it was a really nice conversion. On this particular evening, she was planning on heading out later to celebrate New Year's Eve locally with her friends. She was in the house alone while getting ready, and had left her room to put her makeup on in the bathroom. While doing this, she heard a really loud knock on her front door and some scuffling outside. Assuming it was one of her housemates coming back to grab something that they'd forgotten, she headed downstairs to let them in. As she got close to the door, she heard voices she didn't recognize, and she could see the shapes of 2 people through the frosted glass. We've lived in London all our lives and are both pretty quick to not trust a situation, so she kept quiet and slowly made her way back upstairs, when the door literally flies open with a huge bang, and a man and woman come flying in. She could smell the alcohol in these 2 from a floor up, and from the way they were talking, she could tell they were totally off their faces on a shit ton of drugs too, as they immediately start to force entry into the first bedroom on the ground floor and grab anything they can find. My sister, in a panic, makes a dash up the staircase to her attic room to stay out of their way and out of sight until she can figure out what to do next. In her room, she finds her phone and immediately calls the police. She has to tell the operator what's going on as quietly as possible and is told that the police will be there in 12 minutes. She told me that this 12 minutes was the longest and most terrifying 12 minutes of her life, as she hears the banging and smashing noises from downstairs starting to move up the house. It is, of course, at this moment that she remembers the staircase which leads up to the attic that is still down, as she hadn't had time to pull it up behind her in her frenzied dash to her room. To counter this frankly appalling realization, she moves every item of furniture over the trap door, and then sits on top of it all to stop them gaining entry if they try. As she sits there, too terrified to even breathe, and her heartbeat racing in her ears, she hears them kick down the very last door in the house, right next to the staircase. The woman is screaming and smashing things up, and the man is shouting instructions about what items to steal. These total dickheads are so confident, and off their faces they don't even bother to try to keep quiet, which makes them so much scarier. She hasn't got a doubt that if a person confronted them, or they found someone in that house, they would become very violent, as it becomes obvious to both them and her that the last place to try is her room. She hears the most beautiful sound anyone has ever heard, as the yell of "Police" echoes up the stairs. These two fuckers might be out of it, but they know what this means. The guy just clean jumps out the second floor window, lands on the shed, and escapes over the garden fence. But the woman can't figure out which way to run and is caught by the police, screaming, biting, scratching, and swearing. My sister, sitting on top of the chest of drawers over her trap door, in exactly the same position she had been for those seemingly never-ending 12 minutes, can only bring herself to open the trap door once the police tell her over and over again that it's safe to do so. The devastation of the house is shocking, and makes her so grateful that she had a place to hide, but also compounds how terrifying it was to have to sit helpless and trapped in the attic as these people violently tore apart every house in the room, systematically making their way closer and closer to her hiding place. She speaks to the police, gives her statement, and then calls my mom in a total wreck. She goes to stay with my mom and little sister for a few days while it's sorted out, then moves in with her boyfriend, who is also a student at the same uni. She only returns to collect her stuff, which at least is still around. Everyone else, door locked or unlocked, had their valuables stolen. This story strikes me with total dread, and is probably one of the scariest things I've ever heard. Imagining what it must have been like for her makes me feel sick. The man never got caught, and the landlord, who never fixed their front door lock before the break-in after being repeatedly asked, tried to make my sister keep paying her rent after she moved out, as per the contract agreement. Well, fuck that. She gave him an elaborate array of places he could shove his contract, and I'm pleased to report he must have chosen one of them, because that was the end of that. First time poster. Finally have a story to tell on here. Last night was New Year's Eve. My husband, myself, and 2 other couples went out to a strip of bars for the night. We all got completely shit-faced. We were drinking and smoking throughout the night. Right after midnight, I stopped drinking because I didn't want to be hungover, but kept smoking. This is relevant later in the story. So it's finally 2 a.m. Walk outside and realize that the person who had got the Uber was not only shit-faced, but his phone was dead. He had put the Uber app on his phone just for this occasion, so we were all left to figure it out. We are from somewhere that doesn't have Uber, so it's all new to us. Anyways, it's cold as hell. The drunkest one of us all is the one trying to get Uber on her phone. And at this point, it's very dark, and there's not a soul in sight. A guy comes up to our group and asks us if we have a cigarette. We all say no, and he starts talking to the guys in our group. He has a big-ass smile on his face and crazy eyes. He starts trying to joke around about fucking one of us or something, and my husband finally tells him he needs to walk away. My husband is extremely confrontational, especially when he's drunk, but at this point he doesn't think too much of it and just wants him to leave. About 3 minutes later, the guy comes back up to us and asks us if we have a cigarette, like it's the first time he's seeing us. I was extremely high and started to realize just how fucking weird this guy was being. My husband tells him to leave, and he starts getting an attitude with us. He walks away, but I start watching him, and he just turns the corner from the building we were standing at and stops to stare at us. I try to tell everyone in my group that we need to just start walking and get away from this guy, but no one is paying attention to me. Everyone is belligerent. I was extremely high, so I thought I was the only one paying attention, and it was making me even more scared. At one point, my friend's husband was saying he thought he had Uber, but he was just pressing random buttons the entire time. That's how bad we were. Homeboy shows back up again asking for a cigarette, and my husband loses it and tries to fight him. We are all telling him to back down, it's not worth it, etc. I see Crazy Eyes run around the corner again, and I'm so high and paranoid I'm begging everyone to just call the police. Everyone is blowing the whole situation off, and I was convinced he was planning something. All of a sudden, Crazy Eyes screams, "You're under arrest!" and comes charging at us with his right hand in his pocket and his left hand covering whatever he was holding, making it look like he had a gun. He had the scariest fucking look on his face, and I just knew he was there now to come and shoot us. He shouts at us the whole time while walking towards us. And when he gets up close, he pulls out his phone and says, "Haha, just kidding." But he wasn't smiling. He was just saying he was kidding, but with a pissed off rage face. My husband and my friend freaked the fuck out on him, and my other friend is screaming at them, trying to get them to back away. Somehow, the drunkest of us all finally says that an Uber is 3 minutes away, and she shows up super fast. The longest 3 minutes of my life. If he was drunk, it wouldn't have been such a big deal. But there was a whole new level of fear when you know you are dealing with someone who is just not mentally stable and unpredictable, or on some kind of drug. So Crazy Eyes, terrorizing people who are too drunk to function? Fuck off, and let's never meet again. I've been reading all the amazing stories on this thread, and it made me think about my own unsettling experiences. Though my story is nowhere near as creepy as others are on here, I thought I'd share it just the same. A few years back, I was in my early 20s at the time. I spent New Year's Eve with an old friend I'd known my whole life. We'd gone our separate ways after school, as you do, and it was the first time we'd met in several years. Long story short, she ended up getting too drunk and things turned unpleasant. Since I was sleeping over at her house, which was a good 30-minute drive from my parents, and I was basically stranded in a distant town until I could reach my mom to pick me up, I waited until it was lights out, left a note for my friend saying thanks for everything, and snuck out while she was asleep. It was a nice neighborhood, so I started walking, since I knew I would have another couple of hours to kill before my mom could come and get me at the pre-appointed time. I eventually came upon a Sears, a large department store for those of you who don't know them. It was early on a Sunday morning, and the massive parking lot was empty, as the store had not yet opened. I called my mom to let her know where I was, told her about the change of plans, and asked her to please come ASAP, figuring the store was a good place as any place to wait for her. Just as I hung up, a pickup truck pulled up to the entrance of the store where I was standing, and the driver rolled down the window and asked if I needed a ride. The guy looked and sounded normal enough, so I politely replied that my ride was on its way, and after asking again whether I was sure, he finally drove off. About half an hour later, the store had opened, and I decided to wander around inside while I was waiting for my mom to arrive. After a long browse around all the departments of the massive store, I headed back outside out into the parking lot to wait in the fresh air and sunshine. To my surprise, I observed the same pickup truck driving right towards me. The same guy leaned across the passenger side and said, "Listen, I can give you a ride to wherever you're going. Really, it's no problem." More peeved than startled at his reappearance, I again answered that my ride was on its way, turned and walked back into the store to signal that my conversation was over. Inside, I called my mom, only to find out that she was still at church and would not be coming to get me for another hour or so. Perturbed, I walked around the large shop again, just waiting for the hour to finally be up. After about 15 minutes had passed, I walked back out the exit to a still empty parking lot to watch for my mom's car. The moment I walked out, the pickup quickly rolled up to where I stood at the entrance, and the driver, all pretense and friendliness gone now, snapped, "Get in the truck!" The hatred in his voice was so evident. I must have been in shock, because to this day I still cannot recall what happened after he said that. I can only imagine what I would have done if he had, like so many people in that state, been carrying a gun. Thankfully he was not, and I must have noped it back into the safety of the store on autopilot, and stayed in there until my mom finally came. It was only looking back on the situation afterwards that I fully realized how creepy and potentially dangerous it and the short-tempered pickup driver actually was. He must have been lurking in/around that parking lot for a total of 2 hours at least. At the time, all I had felt was annoyance and anger toward the creepy, short-tempered stranger. In hindsight, I wish I had tried to remember his license plate so I could have reported the incident, since the casual ease with which he ordered me into his truck shows that picking up girls might possibly be something he makes a habit of. Dear readers, both male and female, always be safe and never let anyone pressure you into getting into their car. Stranger danger is, apparently, not just an issue for kids to be aware of. And pushy Sears parking lot creep, let's never meet again. Okay, so I'm about to tell you the scariest thing that ever happened to me. The thing is, I'm not an English speaker, and even though I manage, I'm not sure about all the technical scuba diving vocabulary. I'll do my best, but please be indulgent. It happened last year between Christmas and New Year's Eve. I'm from the French Caribbean, so it's not unusual to scuba dive during Christmas holidays. My family and I, 25 female, booked a few dives. They're all really good scuba divers, better than me. They passed a few scuba diving levels that allow them to participate in a way more technical dives than I'm allowed to do. I enjoy scuba diving as well, and I'm able to do almost every casual dive, but I don't feel safe diving without an instructor yet, even more if it's a deep dive with decompression stops required. If anyone isn't familiar with scuba diving, here's a quick explanation. You can dive safely until a certain depth, before the pressure becomes dangerous. If you dive below that point, which is roughly 20 meters or 65 feet, you have to do decompression stops during your ascent. It means that you have to stop while you're going back to the surface for a certain time to let your body adapt itself to the pressure. If you ride up too quickly, you may catch decompression sickness, which can lead, in worst case scenario, to death. So we decided that I could manage a little private lesson with an instructor first, prior to more exciting dives with my family. So, the first day, my family was enjoying a dive on a technical spot that I wasn't feeling up to while I was alone with my instructor and retrieving my old scuba diving reflexes. Everything went okay. We were on a beautiful coral reef. There was many beginners on the boat, and I was by far the more experienced there. So, finally my instructor deciding that he could manage me and another student, which was truly a beginner, and after a small briefing with every safety rule and a hand sign, which was the only way to communicate underwater, we begun our descent. I quickly retrieved all my old reflexes and was enjoying myself, going back and forth to the instructor and the beginner diver, during at least 20 minutes. Everything was perfect besides one thing. It was a windy day, and there was a heavy swell. It's less of a problem underwater than it is for surface swimmers. The only thing was that it requires more physical effort to swim, and so my air bottle was emptying a little quicker than usual, which is normal. I signed to my instructor that I was running thin on air, and he nodded. It was at this level far from being critical. It was at this moment when I saw a young man swimming towards me. It wasn't the instructor nor its student. I've never seen him before, but he was in full scuba diving gear, and we were the only dive boat on the spot, so I assumed he was with us, and I wasn't paying attention to him on the boat. He was swimming fast towards me, and then signed to me that he was out of air. When an air failure happens in scuba diving, there's a very strict procedure. You have to help the person, no questions asked, because every second is vital. If you faint underwater, you drown. On your gear, you have 2 breathing devices, regulator, octopus, and I'm not sure about the English word, a main device and a spare device. So I handed the guy my spare breathing device, which means that we were both breathing on my gear, consuming twice as much air as I was consuming alone. I waited till the guy seemed to calm down and tried to hand sign him to go see the instructor. He nodded a no and signed me to start our ascent. I understand this is the procedure. I was a little low on air and above the decompression stop level, so the right thing to do was going up to the surface before having an air failure, but I had to tell my instructor first. The guy was very reluctant, and it was strange because it would have taken us like 30 seconds to tell the instructor, and he would have started the ascent with us. During this time, I was panicking as seeing my own air level going down, and I saw that our instructor was staring at us quizzically and swimming towards us. It was at this moment that the guy let go of my spare air device and started swimming away, breathing again in his own breathing device. I was totally lost and started my ascent with my instructor. Once at the surface, because of the tides, I was feeling dizzy and nauseous, so my bizarre encounter wasn't the first thing that I debriefed. It was after I calmed down and the boat was driving us towards the beach without the strange guy that I asked my instructor what happened. "Oh, I don't know, maybe a guy who lost his group and needed some time to calm down," I replied. "Okay, but why did he tell me he was out of air?" My instructor told me that I probably misunderstood his hand signing, and he was probably not telling me he was having an air failure because he left breathing on his own device. But I'm sure I saw him do the air failure sign. But okay. The next day, I joined my family during my dive, and the instructor was different. It was a girl this time. Charlie. I've had time to think about the guy, and I was worried about him, so I told everything that happened to Charlie and asked her if she knew the guy and if he was okay, because I didn't see him come back up to the surface. She asked me to describe him, which I did, and she told me, "Oh, that's Marvin. No, don't worry about him. He's preparing himself to become a scuba diving instructor. Every time he has a day off from the restaurant he's working in, he asks us to drive him onto the coral reef in the morning and pick him up in the afternoon. I ate at his restaurant this noon and saw him. Don't worry." I was feeling relieved and told myself that it was just a comprehension issue with Marvin. The rest of the week went without any incident. I was doing more and more technical dives, and everything went very smoothly. Charlie was a wonderful instructor. Never saw Marvin again, that being said, until the last dive. It was on New Year's Eve. We planned the best dive on that day. It was a shipwreck, and I felt trained enough to try it without an instructor. Just my family and I. It was Charlie's day off. It was fairly deep for a beginner like me, 30 meters at its down point, around 98 feet. My first day, male instructor was there and told us that he would be exploring the shipwreck too, so we could cross him and he would help me if he saw that I needed it. It was very comforting to know, and my family felt comforted too when I told them that. So, we begun our descent and started swimming around the shipwreck. We crossed our old instructor twice, but every time I signed him that everything was okay. It was at that moment that I saw Marvin swimming towards me. At this moment, I was about 5 to 10 meters above my down point, still staying under my decompression stop level though. I was a little surprised, and even more surprised when he signed me that he again was out of air. I was mistrustful, but if there were any chance that it would be true, I couldn't not help him. So I handed him my spare breather. This time, I had many air left, and it wasn't a problem. He took it, started breathing it in, and took my arm. I reached to see his air level instruments, but he prevented me from seeing it. Then, he signed for me to start the ascent with him. I immediately signed no. I wasn't at my deepest when he had reached me, but I had been deeper during this time. And I've had a decompression stop to do. I saw that my father saw us, but he quickly looked away, probably not understanding what was going on. I tapped at my diving computer, a device which calculates when and how long to decompress, to signify it to him. He shrugged, smiled, and started swimming up, still holding me. I was paralyzed for a few seconds, and the thing that helped me react was that my diving computer was telling me to stop and decompress now. I then understood that I was in danger, and if I let him do what he wanted, I could die from the bends. I then started screaming, only to remember that no noise can be heard underwater. I started wiggling frantically as I saw my father and sisters way below me, my diving computer alerting me more and more intensely. At that moment, my father saw us, and he reacted. He swam very quickly towards us and managed to hit the guy as my dad grabbed my ankle and suddenly dragged me deeper. The guy then quickly swam away. My dad dragged me deeper again, and then he waited for a very long decompression stop to ensure that I would be okay. then started heading towards the surface very slowly and cautiously. On the surface, I started crying frantically and went back to the boat. My father then told me that he thought Marvin was my old instructor, and this is why he wasn't surprised at first. I then told it to my old instructor, who took it more seriously this time, and told me to show him Marvin when he would go up to the surface. Thing is, he never did. Next day on New Year, we went one last time to scuba diving club because my little sisters had a diploma to collect, and we saw Charlie. Still shocked, I told her what happened with Marvin, and then she stiffened. She told me that Marvin was at the restaurant yesterday for New Year's Eve, and he didn't go scuba diving, which means that this guy was not Marvin. And to this day, I still don't know who he is, and what he wanted, and why he tried to kill me maybe twice. So, not Marvin? I still don't know if I'm going to scuba dive during the upcoming holidays, but if I do, I'll leave you alone with your air failure. When I was 13, the dawning of a new millennium took place on New Year's Eve. While people were fearing the worst with the Y2K bug, or out partying and drinking, I was home alone. In 1996, my parents had split up, and from then, their divorce. And my mother and I moved across the country from Oregon to Tennessee with her best friend. On the eve of the year 2000, I was home alone. My mother was currently out of state. Now this didn't worry me, as this was not the first time. I often came home to find a note on the kitchen counter saying they had gone to Florida for a few days, and that there were groceries in the fridge. Since the divorce, she was regularly leaving me home alone for long periods of time to go to Florida. We lived on a relatively quiet road, surrounded by trees, and set a few miles out of town, and I knew most of the people, if not by name, then by face, enough to wave and small chat with. And I had never before been given a reason to be afraid of being alone. On the night in question, I was staying up late to watch television. I remember I was watching the movie His Bodyguard on USA Channel, and had most of the lights on in the house, not because I was afraid, but because I was 13. I wasn't concerned with electricity bills or saving the environment, but I felt completely safe and protected within my little bubble of a home. As I was watching the movie, I kept hearing these weird sounds outside, but I remember thinking it was probably the neighbors. Though they weren't extremely close, a couple of them were having a party/people over for the holiday. About halfway into the movie, however, the power in the house suddenly went dead. I sat on the couch for a minute, in sort of a panic daze, because it was near midnight and pitch black. I remember thinking the power must have gone out, and that it would come back on, so I just decided to sit on the couch with my blanket and wait. A few minutes passed by when I heard a noise in the kitchen, where the back door was. My heart started racing in my chest, because I had thought it sounded like the back door being shut. The back door sits just off the dining room, which is connected to the kitchen, which leads directly into the living room where I was currently sitting on the couch. A few seconds passed after I had heard the sound, and I was straining my ears to pick up anything that wasn't supposed to be there. Every noise suddenly felt magnified. When footsteps sounded on the floor, I immediately slithered off the couch onto all fours, crawled around the ottoman, and started as slowly and as quietly as I could make my way toward the space between the love seat and the couch. I knew I could fit under the side table and be completely hidden by the dark and the ottoman, from playing hide-and-go-seek in the dark many, many times with friends during sleepovers. I was nearly there when the footsteps became more apparent. I knew from the sound of them that whoever it was making their way through the kitchen now toward the living room. They weren't hurried or anything. It was like they were just moving around in the kitchen. I glanced up from where I was crouched on the floor, and to my horror, there was a dark silhouette standing in the archway between the two rooms. To my credit, I didn't scream. However, I did panic. I stood immediately to my feet from my hiding spot and ran down the hallway, and I believe the only reason I wasn't overcome was because the person chasing me had to get around the ottoman in the dark to follow me. I did what all children do when they're afraid, and I bypassed the front door, the guest bedroom, the bathroom, and ran to the farthest door down the hallway, my room. In all honesty, I probably wouldn't have been able to get the front door unlocked and open in time, as it was right off the side of the couch. When I was 10, I got a bird for my birthday. He was a blue frosted Amazon, and I named him Boo, because it was October and close to Halloween. Boo had a large iron cage. It could have been metal, but very large, sturdy, and like 6 feet tall. And it was kept in my room, despite the fact that Boo, like me, pretty much had the run of the house whenever he wanted. This information will become very relevant in the story later. As I ran into the room, I slammed the door shut and locked it. However, the lock was simply one of those little turn knobs that you can easily pop with a butter knife. I had barely gotten the door shut and locked when the person on the other side knocked on it. I have no idea why they knocked, if they did it to mock me or scare me, but I knew in my heart that my little lock was not going to keep whoever it was on the other side out of my room. It didn't keep out my mother when we were arguing, and it wouldn't stand up to brute force. I was panicking, on the verge of tears when the person started laughing. It was low, quiet, and because of that, it was even more frightening. It wasn't like manic laughter, but as if they were genuinely amused. It was the laughter that really frightened me, and I started heavily, hysterically crying and looking around my room to figure out what I could do. That was when I realized Boo's cage would fit almost perfectly between the door and the wall of my closet. The cage moved quietly on my carpeted floor, but as I pushed it into place, it scraped against the door and alerted whoever it was on the other side that I was trying to barricade myself in, because suddenly they threw themselves at my door, and you could hear the sound of the wood splintering and the door handle being twisted violently. Boo, who had been stirred by the movement awake, began literally screaming and flapping his wings. I might have screamed with him, but honestly, I don't remember screaming. I just remember being extremely scared. Terrified, I crawled under my bed/couch, a bunk bed with a futon at the bottom, metal, and waited. Several minutes passed and the person eventually stopped attacking my door. Boo continued screaming even after he had stopped. Though, being under my bed gave me no feelings of being secure, I didn't come out from it because I simply had nowhere else to go. I thought about trying to go out the window, but I was afraid he might expect it and therefore be waiting for me on the other side. And it was also several feet off the ground, as the house was built on a raised foundation. I remember laying under my bed, terrified, for what felt like hours. I must have fallen asleep because I awoke the next morning to daylight. The fear of what happened came back to me as soon as I registered where I was and why, and scared that whoever had been in my house might still be there. I decided to crawl out the window and run to a neighbor since it was daylight outside, and therefore I felt less afraid. Crawling out a window was a lot harder than it looks, and I did it less than gracefully, as I was not and still am not the most coordinated human being. Once I was back on my feet, however, I carefully made my way around the house, and that's when I noticed that the back door was wide open. Scared, but feeling braver now that I was outside, and that it was morning instead of pitch black night, I walked up the back steps and peered inside. Seeing nothing out of the ordinary, no terrifying man leering at me basically, I decided to go inside. Looking back, I cringe on how stupid this could have turned out, and that I wish I could have told my younger self to make a smarter move and just go get help. But thankfully, no one was inside. I did a terrifying, heart-pounding room-to-room check, looking in closets and under beds, behind the couch, anywhere I thought even a small child might be able to fit. I even popped the lock on my mom's room so I could check it, and then relocked it afterwards. When I was positive no one was there, I went back to lock the back door. I had left it open in case I needed to escape, and noticed that the breaker box on the opposite wall was open. The main switch had been pulled. I flipped it back on, locked both locks on the back door, checked all the windows and front door, and then called my mom, where I once again broke down crying hysterically. She called a coworker who came and stayed the entire day with me as they drove back. My mom still took random trips to Florida after that, but I always went with her from then on after. So, terrifying, laughing, crazy person that broke into my house on New Year's Eve, please, let's never meet again. I sincerely hope no other young girl had to meet you either. I don't know if you were just some drunk visitor of a neighbor, but you terrorized me that night. I was afraid of being alone when my mom was working, and to this day, I still get scared when I'm home alone. Overthink what I would do if someone came inside and where I would hide. When my cats make a noise out of nowhere, I immediately investigate for fear. It's someone trying to get in. If you have any stories that you would like to see narrated here on the channel, please go into the subreddit and submit them there. The link is in the description. Also, we do have a Discord now. Thank you so much to Creepy Clown Girl for putting it together for us. You can come hang out with me and other narrators and get the party started, get spooky with us. That link is also in the description as well. And last but certainly not least, I wanted to introduce the King of Panic. We have a lot of brand new content coming soon with him in it. He is very talented. He does not have his own channel. He just kind of wants to be a part of this. So if you would like to hear from him once you start and you like his voice, stay tuned here. And as always, thank you for visiting the Panic Room. You have successfully made it to the next portion of your tour. Please stay tuned for your next prompt. Click the like button and subscribe to receive notifications for when the next portion of your tour is ready to join. Thank you for watching. Don't let the panic drown you.